Welcome to this video in which I will present a general overview on the Earth's geologic history, evolution, and the geologic history of Nevada. With 4.6 billion years of history to cover, we have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Let's first discuss the geologic timescale. The geologic timescale is the calendar, if you will, for events that have taken place in Earth's history since it is such a vast amount of time. The timescale is divided into named units of time in descending order of duration from eons to eras, periods, epochs, and ages. There are 3 eons that represent the Precambrian, the Hadean, the Archean, and the Proterozoic. These are broken down into areas, which are what we will be referring to in our discussion. We are currently, and have been for the last 542 million years, in the Phanerozoic eon. The Phanerozoic is also broken down into periods, subperiods, and epochs, which we will refer to in our discussion. Now it's time for a little perspective. Here we have the geologic timescale, or the 4.6 billion years of Earth's history put to the calendar year. We will refer to the dates and times throughout this presentation. Just a few highlights before we move on. The inferred origin of life, or the first cells, is estimated to be somewhere around February 25th. Bacteria show up April 18th, and eukaryotes, which is what you are, don't show up until July 18th. The Cambrian explosion of life, or when multicellular life really grabbed a hold and began to take off on planet Earth, didn't start until November 17th. Dinosaurs didn't show up until December 13th, and modern humans don't occur until the last 12 seconds of the year. Out of 31,536,000 seconds that make up the year, we represent just 12 seconds of that. Let's briefly review plate tectonics. The Earth is made up of 7 major tectonic plates that are always in motion. You can think of these tectonic plates as the thin layer of ice on top of your soda. The soda being the melted portion of the inside of the Earth, or the mantle where the magma lives, and the layer of ice representing the tectonic plates, or the crust. Tectonic plates are constantly traveling around on the mantle, even if you can't see or feel them doing so. This is a diagram showing the layers of the Earth. We have the crust, mantle, outer core, and inner core. Tectonic plates make up the crust and move on top of the mantle due to convection currents or movement of magma within the mantle. This is an example of how convection works. On the left is an image of a pot of water on a stove with 2 floating blocks of wood. As the stove heats up the water and starts to boil, a convection current will develop, causing the blocks of wood to separate and pushing them to the edges of the pan. The image on the right shows the same scenario, only with a view into the Earth, showing convection currents in the mantle pulling 2 plates away from one another. Tectonic plates may converge, forming a convergent margin, diverge, forming a divergent margin, or slide past one another, forming a transform plate boundary. We will first look at divergent margins. This happens when tectonic plates move away or diverge from one another. When plates move away from one another, the mantle is exposed and magma will spill out onto the surface of the Earth as lava, which cools and makes new crust. Next, we will look at convergent margins. Since the Earth is a sphere, where there are tectonic plates moving away from each other in one portion of the world, there are plates crashing into one another in another part of the world. When plates of equal density crash into one another, they will buckle or fold, and this is where mountains are built. So when continental crust crashes into continental crust, or oceanic crust collides with oceanic crust, neither will give, so they just buckle and build mountains upward. However, when plates of different densities collide, the heavier plate will sink or subduct underneath the lighter plate, eventually turning the heavier plate back into magma. Oceanic crust is very dense or heavy, so it will sink underneath the lighter continental crust. As it sinks and the plate is melted, magma chambers are created, which produce volcanic mountain ranges as the buoyant magma tries to reach the surface. Finally, we will look at a transform plate boundary. Transform plate boundaries occur when two tectonic plates slide past one another. An example of this type of boundary is the San Andreas Fault. Now we start the calendar, the first second of January 1st. Dust and debris from the formation of the Sun accreted to form a rocky nucleus now known as Earth. The Hadean represents the beginning of Earth, which started 4.6 billion years ago. During the Hadean, Earth was a meteorite and comet-bombarded mass of magma. What is the difference between meteorites and comets? Meteorites are masses of stone or metal that have reached the Earth from outer space, and comets are celestial objects consisting of a nucleus of ice and dust. What would happen to a comet if it impacted Earth during this time? It would melt or flash to steam. We will come back to this. So I'm here telling you that 4.6 billion years ago, the Earth was a meteorite and comet-bombarded ball of magma. What evidence do you think a geologist would use to support this conclusion? Well, there are lots of tools that are used, but geology and data within the rocks helps to paint a 4.6 billion-year-old picture. Do you know what formed during the Hadean that we see almost every night? Well, the moon formed during the Hadean. The moon formed due to an impact between Earth and a Mars-sized body called Theia. Theia knocked off a chunk of lava from the Earth. Some of the debris was captured in the Earth's orbit. Plate tectonics is not a process that takes place on the moon, and due to a lack of an atmosphere, neither does erosion. Both are processes that destroy or change rock. Therefore, when scientists study the moon, they are able to decipher ages of the craters, which indicate heavy meteorite and comet bombardment during the Hadean. Moving through the Hadean, the Earth began to cool, allowing some of the magma to form our first crust. There were also gases that were being released from deep within the Earth, creating the Earth's first atmosphere. A one-day rotation took 6 hours. This number has been calculated using daily growth segments in shells through time and the distance between the Earth and the Moon, and then has been projected all the way back to the Hadean. February 17th, the beginning of the Eoarchean. As the Earth cooled, the area surrounding the Earth would cool as well. The condensation of the steam that had accumulated in the atmosphere from the comets and water vapor released through volcanism would create heavy rains, which would fall to the Earth's surface and accumulate to form our first shallow seas. At this time, the atmosphere contained mostly carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water vapor. There was no free oxygen in the atmosphere, and you could not have breathed. Now we will move on to the Paleoarchean. Around 3.5 billion years ago, or March 21st, we see the first evidence of life on Earth in the form of prokaryotic cells, or cells that don't have a nucleus. What would a geologist be looking for as evidence for when life first appeared on Earth? That's right, fossils. Understand that DNA is an essential molecule for life. It acts like a recipe, holding the instructions telling our bodies how to develop and function. Genes, or where you get your traits, are made up of DNA. Amino acids are what proteins are made of. The arrangement of the amino acids is decided by the DNA. Each arrangement allows for a different function, like nerve cells or cells that make up your skin. If we unraveled all of the DNA molecules in our body and placed them end to end, it would stretch from the sun to Pluto and back. So in order for life to start, you need both DNA and amino acids. In order to have DNA and amino acids, certain elements have to be present and have a mechanism by which to fuse or combine. Scientists have not figured out exactly how life started, but we will present 6 possibilities. 1. Comets could have seeded our oceans with the initial molecules needed to make DNA and proteins. Naked amino acids have been found floating in intrastellar dust clouds. If these naked amino acids were to get caught up in a comet, the comet could have brought these molecules to Earth. 2. Life could have started spontaneously at or around volcanic vents, where the heat energy could fuse the carbon-rich molecules together, making complex amino acids. 3. Primordial soup. This is where there was a water-based sea of simple organic molecules. A lightning bolt striking the water could create enough heat and energy to fuse elements together. 4. Under freezing conditions. This is argued against because it is believed that Earth's surface was still pretty hot during this time period. 5. Deep in the Earth's crust, where a variety of elements would be exposed to enough heat to cause fusion. Or 6. Within clay, where the clay molecules would have positive charges that would attract organic molecules, which could then combine and form life. In either case, the first life on Earth would be prokaryotic and anaerobic, meaning organisms that do not require oxygen for growth and may react negatively or die in the presence of oxygen. Now on to the Mesoarchean. April 15th marks the oldest fossils that have been found of bacteria. Straddling the Paleoarchean and the Neoarchean was an evolutionary advancement that enabled these initial prokaryotes to use sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to produce sugars for food along with oxygen. What process is this? It's something that plants do. It's photosynthesis. Is photosynthesis important to you? Well, it should be, because without it, we would have no oxygen and we would not be able to breathe. These photosynthetic organisms were cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria would introduce oxygen into our atmosphere, which would eventually create our protective ozone in which organisms could live. When we discuss evolution, we are talking about changes or mutations that took thousands to millions of years to happen. Evolution does not just happen overnight. One scientist did a study, a highly speeded up equivalent of geologic time. They put a strain of E. coli into 12 flasks. Each flask contained the exact same broth, which was made up of glucose and citrate. Each flask was referred to as a tribe. Glucose was their food source. Every day, they would be put into a new flask with fresh broth. The bacteria's population would skyrocket in the beginning of the day and stabilize as they ran out of glucose. This experiment has been going on for over 20 years. That is 7,000 flask generations and 45,000 bacterial generations. They have about 6 generations per day. If this experiment was performed on humans, 45,000 generations back would be about 1 million years ago. Shortly after generation 33,000, one of the tribe's population suddenly went berserk. They discovered how to consume the citrate. The E. coli had to develop two mutations in order to consume the citrate, referred to as mutation A and mutation B. Mutation A would prime the bacteria to take advantage of mutation B when it came along, but both mutations had to be there in order for the E. coli to consume the citrate. May 22nd, here in the Neo-Archean, and plate tectonics is in full force. Studies done by scientists show chemical changes in the rock which support the theory that about 3 billion years ago, recycling of rocks had begun. Plate tectonics is a major player in many events we will discuss in the future of the Earth. The Paleoproterozoic begins on June 14th and ends around August 23rd. This is the longest period of time in the geologic timescale. The first of two major glaciation events that took place in the Proterozoic happened at the beginning of the Paleoproterozoic and would last about 35 million years. The introduction of oxygen into the atmosphere by the newly evolved photosynthetic organisms would have several implications. One, which would be the decrease of methane levels in the atmosphere. What does methane do for us? Well, it keeps us warm. It's a greenhouse gas. So what happens if it goes away? Well, it'll get cold. As the oxygen was released into the atmosphere, the excited atomic oxygen reacted with water, forming hydroxyl radicals, which oxidized the methane, forming carbon dioxide and water. Methane traps 84 times more heat per mass unit than carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is preferential to methane, but without enough methane, the Earth will cool. And that's what happened. Methane levels fell so low due to the newly introduced atmospheric oxygen, cooling of the planet was initiated, creating the first snowball Earth. The initial introduction of free oxygen would also set off a biologically induced devastation to Earth's early organisms, which is referred to by many names, but we will just go with the oxygen catastrophe. Technically, mass extinctions are defined by the loss of biodiversity, meaning many different species. So, because early Earth did not have biodiversity, the major decline of these organisms is not considered an extinction event. Remember, organisms up to this point were anaerobic, meaning they were harmed by the presence of oxygen and they did not need it to live. So while we view oxygen as a good thing, it was very bad for these early organisms. Oxygen levels would continue to increase in our atmosphere due to ongoing photosynthesis. About 2.5 billion years ago, cells started ingesting or eating other cells. Similar to you eating something that you don't normally eat, the potential outcomes are as follows. They could make you sick, they could make you full, or they could potentially just live inside of you, hopefully in a symbiotic manner. Symbiotically means living together in a mutually beneficial relationship. For example, the bacteria in your stomach help you break down food, and in return, you feed the bacteria. There is anywhere from 500 to 1,000 different species of bacteria in our stomachs that help us break down food, produce vitamins, and prevent harmful bacterial species from colonizing and doing harm to our bodies. In any case, this is how the eukaryotic cell was formed, by cells consuming other cells. A eukaryotic cell has a membrane-bound nucleus where the DNA, or genes, live. All protists, fungi, plants, and animals are composed of eukaryotic cells. This change was critical because up to this point in time, evolution had been stalled for at least 1 billion years. Primitive bacteria used 2% of their energy to copy and maintain DNA, and 75% of their energy making proteins from DNA. So even if the bacteria had the information in their DNA to make features like a limb, they did not have the energy to do it. That is, until one bacteria ingested mitochondrial bacteria, and they ended up living together symbiotically. Mitochondria provide food or energy. Mitochondria contain as much energy per unit size as a lightning bolt. We know this happened because mitochondrial DNA is different from nucleic DNA. Also, the structure of mitochondrial DNA remains the same as the structure of bacterial DNA, being loops instead of linear feature. The same holds true for chloroplasts. Chloroplasts in plants serve the same purpose that mitochondria do in animal cells, only chloroplasts use carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight to make their energy or food for the cells, where mitochondria use oxygen. The way chloroplasts became incorporated into plant cells is analogous to mitochondria. Let's talk a little bit about geology. This is a paleogeographic map with the outline of Nevada superimposed on it. We will periodically see these throughout the presentation. During the middle of the Neoproterozoic, the supercontinent of Rodinia began to be pulled apart by continental rifting, leaving Nevada on a fragment of the supercontinent called Laurentia. The zone of rifting along the western edge of Laurentia ran through the center of what is now Nevada. This rifting opened up a seawade on the western edge of the state. We are now at the beginning of the Mesoproterozoic, on August 25th. Mesoproterozoic fossils show that the single-celled eukaryotes, which evolved during the Paleoproterozoic, were living together in colonies or in slime aggregates of eukaryotic cells. This marks the beginnings of multicellular life. What would be a benefit of being a multicellular organism as opposed to a single-celled organism? Think about why you work in groups. Well, it's to share the workload so that one person or cell doesn't have to do everything for a very large task. What is a critical component of working in a group? Communication. The same is true and essential for multicellular organisms. The cells work together as a group to accomplish a large task, but they all have different jobs. In order to work together, they have to be able to communicate with one another. In this case, it is referred to as cellular communication. What is cellular communication? Well, pinch yourself. Ouch, that hurt. And that's cellular communication. Were you hungry before you went to lunch? Or maybe had your breakfast or dinner? That was your cells producing a hormone which communicates that it's time to eat. The first fossil evidence for a true multicellular organism shows up September 3rd at 11:28 p.m. in the form of seaweed and algae. During the Mesoproterozoic, a one-day rotation was 20 hours. In rocks dating back to the Neoproterozoic, or more specifically on November 14th at 9:23 a.m., 600 million years ago, the first fossil of multicellular animal life is documented. Are there any multicellular animals watching this video? Yep, you all are. So is the evolution of the first multicellular animal important to you? Well, it should be, because you wouldn't be here listening had it not happened. This is the true origination of plants and animals. Every major phyla that exists today originated with this multicellular explosion of life. At the beginning of the Neoproterozoic, oxygen levels had increased to 20%, and large volcanic events were taking place. Both contributed to the most extensive ice age ever. Oxygen reacted with the methane in the atmosphere, and large volumes of sulfur dioxide from the volcanoes may have blocked out the sunlight. This ice age would last about 120 million years. But ongoing volcanic activity and oxygen-consuming organisms would come to the Earth's rescue. Carbon dioxide is also a greenhouse gas. During periods of glaciation, carbon dioxide consumption slows way down. Along with sulfur dioxide, volcanoes spew out carbon dioxide. As it accumulates in the atmosphere, warming will take place, melting snowball Earth. Warming will thaw the oceans and land, allowing for trapped methane to escape, along with accumulations of carbon dioxide. This, coupled with oxygen-consuming bacteria, would bring about equilibrium, possibly aiding in the next major transition in Earth's history. This brings us to the end of the Precambrian. In Nevada, there are only a few areas where Precambrian rocks are exposed. The oldest rocks are found in the East Humboldt Range and are 2.5 billion years old. This is around the boundary of the Archean. And the second oldest rocks are about 1.7 billion years old. They are igneous and metamorphic rocks that can be found in Clark County. However, from the Cambrian to the present, there is lots to be said about Nevada. Let's do a brief summary of the geology of Nevada from the Cambrian to the Devonian. During this time period, Nevada was covered by oceanic waters. Eastern and central Nevada were part of the shallow water continental shelf, and western Nevada graded from the ocean slope to the deep ocean. November 18th, 8:02 p.m., and we're here at the beginning of the Cambrian. Melting of snowball Earth, stabilization of oxygen levels, formation of the ozone, increase of calcium in seawater, and the evolution of ice, very primitive ice, are all possible triggers of the Cambrian explosion. The Cambrian explosion is the most intense burst of life ever known to planet Earth. Lots of sponges and shelled organisms like clams show up in the fossil record, all of which use calcium to make their skeletons or shells. These shelly organisms are the oldest fossils found in Nevada. It is believed that calcium may have started as a toxin to the organism, and as their body became supersaturated, they began to secrete the calcium onto or deposit it within the body, resulting in early bones and shells. Shallow water worm-like creatures, primitive jawless fish, and trilobites all show up in the fossil record during this time period. Later in the Cambrian, the first vertebrate animals are recorded in the fossil record. Are there any vertebrates listening? Yes, we are all vertebrates. Our spine is made of vertebrae. In all vertebrates, the spine serves as a foundation for muscles to attach, giving support and allowing for movement. The evolution of a spine enabled organisms to move from side to side, creating forward thrust. This side-to-side movement allowed for organisms to swim. Why is swimming important? Well, it gives organisms locomotion for travel, allows organisms to get away from predators, and to be or become a predator. Now that these organisms could swim, they could travel to different places or environments in search of their food. So if a bright red organism swims into a green murky environment, what are some possible outcomes for that organism? Well, it could die by probably being eaten, it could leave, or it could evolve and adapt to its new environment. This is how evolution happens. An organism will strive to adapt to a new environment. Small mutations over time will cause slow changes in the organism and ultimately lead to species evolution. These progressive changes are shown in the fossil record. The bottom right-hand image is an ostracoderm, a jawless armored fish. Ostracoderms are the first organisms to exhibit a skull and are considered to be the first vertebrates. This isn't a skull like ours. It was a plate made up of thousands of fused teeth that served to protect against predators. Our skull is made up of vertebrae that have fused together. It is now November 21st at 10:18 p.m. and we're here in the beginning of the Ordovician. Tectonic forces had concentrated most of the world's land masses into one large supercontinent called Gondwana, which was located around the South Pole. Life was mostly confined to large warm seas. Ordovician fossils indicate that during this time period, arthropods dominated the seas and vertebrates continued to evolve. A major radiation of coral reefs, brachiopods, cephalopods, and trilobites occurred during this time period. Also, the first primitive plants and insects appeared on land. The evidence? Plant fossils in non-marine rocks. At the end of the Ordovician, the first of 5 major extinction events occurred. A glacial episode covering Gondwana land caused global climatic cooling and water temperatures to decrease. All major groups survived the extinction, but it wiped out about 85% of marine species. November 27th, 5:53 a.m. marks the beginning of the Silurian. The Silurian time period is when arthropods such as millipedes and scorpions start to make the transition to land. Millipedes and scorpions are among the first organisms to make the transition to land. Millipedes eat plants, which made the transition onto land during the Ordovician, and scorpions eat insects like millipedes, so it is only natural that organisms would follow their food source. This is referred to as coevolution, the change in one species due to the change in another. They were accompanied by mites, daddy longlegs, and the oldest known true insect. It is now November 29th at 3:01 p.m. and we have just arrived in the Devonian. On land, shrubs and plants had ran out of horizontal living space, so they started growing upward, resulting in our first true forests. With more plant matter and deeper roots, significant amounts of soil began to form which would support even more plant life. Bugs had gotten bigger, feasting on all the decaying plant matter. Early bugs couldn't digest fresh plant matter, so they had to wait for the bacteria and fungi to break it down first. The Devonian also marks the period of time when we see the first flying insects in the fossil record. The Devonian is called the Age of the Fish because this is when diversification of fish species happened. The development of jaws and 4 fins would be the catalyst for this diversification. Early fish did not have jaws, but the development of jaws allowed fish to consume new varieties of prey. This prey may have lived in different environments. Remember, as these newly jawed fish came into new environments, they would evolve or adapt to be better suited for their new environments. The evolution of a jaw would also cause changes in the skull, which would support and assist the use of the jaw for biting, chewing, and crushing. These changes would eventually give rise to 2 major groups of organisms that we will talk about later. 5 main groups of fish would evolve during the Devonian, of which only 2 still have living representatives. The 2 groups are the sharks and the bony fish. The bony fish group is broken down into 2 groups of its own, the ray fins and the lobed fins. Both groups have a lung in addition to their gills. When we think of a normal fish, we are thinking about a ray fin fish. However, and probably surprisingly to most, the direct ancestors to every single amphibian, reptile, mammal, and bird on the planet is the lobed-finned fish. The lobed-finned fish use their 4 paired fins not only to swim, but also to move around in shallow waters and eventually onto land. A tetrapod is an organism with 4 paired limbs and digits. These lobe-finned fish are the first tetrapods. For your information, we are all tetrapods. With the coevolution of the lung, we now have an organism that primarily lives in water but has the ability to cruise up on land. What group of organisms does this sound like? That's right, the amphibians. Most Devonian tetrapods were aquatic, meaning they still lived in the water. A few were making the transition to land during this time period, like Tiktaalik. Tiktaalik is pictured in the upper left-hand corner of the Devonian row. Tiktaalik had eyes on top of his head used for looking out of the water, lobe fins that gave him locomotion on land, and a head that moved independently of the shoulders, which would indicate the presence of a neck. It is not until the next time period that these tetrapods fully transition to land. By the end of the Devonian, plants capable of producing seeds appear in the fossil record. Another major extinction occurred in the late Devonian. Large trees had evolved on land, and the pulse in photosynthesis caused carbon dioxide levels to fall, cooling the globe. The extinction event occurred primarily in shallow tropical seas, so a number of trilobite and brachiopod species went extinct, and coral reef communities suffered as well. Starting at the end of the Devonian and persisting through the Mississippian, a change in tectonic forces led to a period of widespread mountain building in Nevada. A mountain building event is called an orogeny, and during this time period there were three major orogenies. From oldest to youngest, these events are referred to as the Antler, Humboldt, and Sonoma orogenies. The mountain building caused the ocean to be cut off from eastern and central Nevada by the end of the Mississippian, but oceanic waters existed in western Nevada as well as an inland sea trapped to the east by the mountains. Also, as the mountains continued to rise, they would shed enormous amounts of sediments to the east due to erosion. Fossils that you may find in Mississippian, Pennsylvanian, and Permian rocks in eastern Nevada would consist of organisms that lived on land, of which there were few at this point, and/or shallow inland seas, and fossils found in central and western Nevada would be consistent with ocean-dwelling organisms. It is now December 3rd at 10:26 a.m. and we are at the beginning of the Mississippian. The Mississippian climate was wet and warm. Partially on land, amphibians were diversifying, some becoming very large, measuring up to 6.5 feet long. These early amphibians filled up on bugs, fish, and even other amphibians. They cruised the land, swam the oceans, and some even lost their legs, becoming snake-like. From these amphibians, the first amniotes would evolve and split off late in the Mississippian. Are there any amniotes listening? Yes, we are all amniotes. An amniote is an organism whose fetus or baby is surrounded by a membrane which retains water while allowing for gas exchange. As National Geographic put it, amniotes are tetrapods that evolved a type of egg where the organism didn't have to put the egg in a pond, it put a pond in the egg. We will come back to the importance of the evolution of the egg in a moment. The oldest amniote fossil documented is a lizard-like reptile that was a small, agile bug catcher. All reptiles, mammals, and birds would evolve from these early amniotes. In fact, the first possible reptiles show up in the fossil record during this period of time, shortly after the appearance of amniotes. This event corresponds to December 5th at 7:33 p.m. on our calendar. In the ocean, the Mississippian was a period of major shark evolution. The warm tropical seas of the Mississippian were perfect for shark species to diversify, and with abundant food sources, they did just that. The fossil record of sharks is very fragmented. Why do you think this is? Well, it's because a shark's skeleton is made completely from cartilage, which does not fossilize well. Ammonites greatly diversified during the Mississippian as well. You can think of an ammonite as a squid in a shell. Ammonites are the extinct relative to the octopus, squid, and cuttlefish. Some ammonites grew more than 3 feet across, a nice snack for the evolving sharks. Ammonites constantly built new shell as they grew, but they only lived in the outer chamber. It is now December 6th at 2:36 p.m. and we are here at the beginning of the Pennsylvanian. An extinction event in the Pennsylvanian caused collapse of large areas of rainforests and devastated the amphibians. This extinction event, coupled with a few evolutionary advancements, would open up niches for the next major groups of organisms. A major split in the amniotic reptile occurred during the Pennsylvanian, which would forever separate reptiles from mammals. Fish, amphibians, and presumably these early amniotic reptiles had what is called an anapsid skull type, meaning there are no openings behind the eye socket. But during the Pennsylvanian, two new types of skull types appear in the fossil record. These are the diapsid and the synapsid skull types. The diapsid skull type has two openings behind each eye socket, where the synapsid skull type only has one opening. The purpose for these openings were to provide leverage points for muscles, which would provide more biting, chewing, tearing, and crushing power for the jaw. I invite you to feel behind your eye socket and observe whether you have one opening or two. If you are not sure, refer to the picture of the human skull in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. You should only feel one opening because you are a synapsid. These early synapsids would evolve into mammals and the future rulers of the Permian. The diapsids would evolve into reptiles and birds. Gymnosperms also appeared during this time period. These include the conifers, the cycads, ginkgo trees, among others. It is now December 9th at 7:21 a.m. and we are at the beginning of the Permian. By the earliest part of the lower Permian, the climate became dry and arid. It was during this time that the full terrestrial amniotic egg developed. What is the main difference between fish eggs and reptile eggs? Fish lay eggs in water and reptiles lay eggs on land. That is exactly what the amniotic egg enabled creatures to do, birth their offspring further inland instead of relying on water nurseries like frogs with their tadpoles. This expanded the habitat or available environments for animals capable of producing amniotic eggs. It also allowed for species survival and evolution during this drier climate. As these organisms spent more time on land, they began to develop a keratin barrier in their skin. A keratin barrier is a wax-like layer that keeps moisture in the skin. Once the keratin barrier was fully developed, these organisms did not need to live in or stay close to water anymore. As a result, an organism that looks similar to an amphibian but can lay eggs and live on land evolved. What groups of organisms does this sound like? That's right, the reptiles. The diapsids from this time period are the ancestors of all living reptiles, and they split off into two groups. The archosaurs, which would give rise to crocodiles and dinosaurs, and the lepidosaurs, which would give rise to lizards and snakes. However, the diapsids were not the rulers of this time period. That designation goes to the ancestors of all mammals, the synapsids. During the Permian, these proto-mammals still looked very reptilian. Pelycosaurs were the first wave of these Permian mammal-like reptiles. They had a large sail on their back, enabling them to warm and cool their bodies quickly. Pelycosaurs, like Dimetrodon, who is pictured in the upper left-hand corner of the Permian section, were the fiercest carnivores the world had seen to date. But another group of carnivorous synapsids were coming on the scene, who wiped out the pelycosaurs. These therapsids were more mammal-like, having faster metabolism, and they were able to chew and breathe at the same time, so it could more efficiently chop up its food, enabling expedited digestion. In general, reptiles swallow their food whole, many thanks to these therapsid cousins who made it possible to chew and enjoy the many flavors of the food we consume. The end of the Permian marked the worst extinction event in our planet's history, the Great Dying, where 90% of all marine species and 70% of all land animals were eliminated. The Permian extinction basically set the evolutionary clock back 300 million years, or back to the Cambrian. The Permian extinction also wiped out 4 out of every 5 species of tetrapods. In fact, every tetrapod to have lived since, including you, can be traced back to these few survivors. The synapsids bounced back more quickly than did the reptiles and other tetrapods. Had they gone completely extinct, we would not be here today. That was a close call. The Permian extinction event caused a total collapse of the rainforests and turned the large Triassic Pangaean landmass into a desert. Mountain building would continue throughout the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous in Nevada. There are several different terrains that were accreted or added on to Nevada during this period of time, expanding the western margin of the state. There was also lots of volcanic activity throughout the state. There were volcanoes that formed, which have since been eroded away, and magma that cooled slowly under the surface. The magma that cooled under the surface would make large bodies of granite, which make up the Sierra Nevada mountains. By the end of the Cretaceous, all of Nevada had been lifted above sea level and cut off from oceanic waters. It is now December 12th at 1:26 p.m. and we are here at the beginning of the Triassic. Due to recent evolutionary changes, one group of organisms would be able to take advantage of this hot, dry Triassic climate due to their ability to thrive in desert-like conditions. What group of organisms does this sound like? That's right, the reptiles. Once the ecosystems recovered from the Permian extinction, all kinds of plants and animals evolved. This is referred to as the Triassic explosion. The explosion favored the reptiles, though synapsids and amphibians would radiate to some extent as well. Scientists have found fossils of large land-dwelling amphibians here in Nevada. We will come back to the mammals in a minute. Let's begin with the reptiles. During the Triassic, the fossil record indicates a major radiation of gliding, climbing, bug-eating, and marine reptiles, one of which would much later be designated as our state fossil. What is the Nevada state fossil? Yes, the ichthyosaur, whose name stands for lizardfish. The ichthyosaur evolved from a land reptile that transitioned into the ocean over a couple million years. They had large eyes, which were thought to help them hunt and see in extremely low light conditions because they lacked echolocation. They ate fish, ammonites, and belemnites. Fossil specimens indicate they had several young, and birth was very dangerous, as many fossils have been found of ichthyosaurs giving birth. There is a beautiful ichthyosaur fossil specimen at Berlin Ichthyosaur State Park right here in northern Nevada. We will now turn our attention to the archosaurs, which were crocodile-like and evolved into primitive dinosaurs by the middle of the Triassic. Archosaurs would diminish the therapsid population and rule the land. By the end of the Triassic, the original group of archosaurs would have split into 5 groups. We will follow these 5 archosaur groups through the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. These groups are the marine reptiles, the crocodiles, the pterosaurs, which were the first tetrapods that could actually fly, the ornithischians or bird-hipped dinosaurs, and the saurischians or lizard-hipped dinosaurs. Let's not forget about the mammals, though. Therapsids had not disappeared completely, and various small therapsids continued to become more mammal-like. The first fossils of official mammals also show up during the late Triassic. Are there any mammals listening? Yes, we are all mammals. By definition, a mammal is a warm-blooded vertebrate that is distinguished by the possession of hair or fur, secretion of milk by females for the nourishment of their young, and typically give birth to live young. These initial mammals were believed to only come out at night. Why would they only come out at night? Why would you not be out during the day during this period of time? Well, perhaps because there were carnivorous reptiles all over the place. But also because a nighttime niche was empty. These early mammals feasted on insects during the night where they had no competition for food. Mammals were also able to survive because they evolved to be warm-blooded and furry. Therefore, they could hunt and hang out in the cool of the night, which reptiles could not because they were cold-blooded. Also, during this time, the mammals evolved advanced hearing, which allowed them to hunt very accurately in the darkness. Hearing like this is identified by the presence of an enlarged brain. In Nevada's late Triassic-aged rocks, there are some true dinosaurs and mammal-like reptiles that have been found. At the end of the Triassic, there was another extinction event where many marine invertebrate groups suffered a high number of losses. It mostly affected the brachiopods, cephalopods, corals, and sponges. But on land, phytosaurs went extinct. The continued breakup of Pangaea resulted in continental rifting with large-scale volcanism, causing this extinction event. It is December 15th at 11:53 a.m. and we begin the Jurassic. Dinosaurs would evolve through the Jurassic to rule the land, diversifying into many species, large and small. We will highlight well-known representatives that show up from each of the 5 groups we are following. This is in no way stating these were the only species to evolve from each group, as there are over 700 documented species of dinosaurs to date. From the marine reptiles, we see the first plesiosaurus fossils show up in the fossil record. Crocodiles continue to evolve. From the pterosaurs, the pterodactyls make their debut. From the ornithischians, we see the first stegosaurus fossils, and from the saurischians, we see the first Dilopithecus, Brachiosaurus, Allosaurus, and Archaeopteryx fossils, which marks the beginning of the birds. Jurassic crocodile, Stegosaurus, and Archaeopteryx fossils have been found here in Nevada. Also worth noting, snakes and salamanders make their debut in the fossil record. It is December 20th at 1:46 p.m. and we enter the Cretaceous. It is a common misconception that many of the dinosaurs we are fond of were present during the Jurassic, but the truth is that it wasn't until the Cretaceous that they show up. From our 5 archosaur groups that we are following, and again highlighting only well-known representatives, we see the first occurrence of Mosasaurus from the marine reptiles. Crocodiles and pterosaurs would continue to evolve. From the ornithischians, we see the first occurrence of Triceratops, Ankylosaurus, and Iguanodon. And from the saurischians, avians would continue to evolve, and we see the first occurrence of T-Rex and Velociraptor. During the Cretaceous, pollinating insects such as bees and flowering plants appear at roughly the same time in the fossil record. What organism do most flowers need to repopulate? Yes, pollinating insects. What do pollinating insects need to survive? You guessed it, pollen. This is an example of coevolution, the change in one species due to the change in another. In just 15 million years, angiosperms, also known as flowering plants, would spread globally and become the most common and diverse plants on the planet. Also during the Cretaceous, 3 groups of mammals would emerge: monotremes, marsupials, and placentals. Monotremes are egg-laying predatory mammals such as the platypus. Marsupials are animals that give birth to very immature young who receive maternal provision, that is food and nutrients, from their mother via lactation. Most are carried in a pouch. Examples of marsupials are opossums, kangaroos, koalas, and wombats. Placental mammals invest more time in their pregnancy, where the fetus gets nutrients from an organ that develops during the pregnancy rather than a yolk sac or a prolonged lactation period after birth. Are there any placental mammals listening? We all are. From these placental mammals, one branch carries the primates, which evolved very late during the Cretaceous. A primate is an omnivorous mammal distinguished by the use of hands, varied locomotion, and complex behavior involving a high level of social interaction and cultural adaptability. Are there any primates listening? Yes, we all are. At the end of the Cretaceous, there was an extinction event, referred to as the KT extinction. It is believed that a meteorite impact caused the KT extinction and led to the demise of the dinosaurs. The meteorite impact probably produced global forest fires, a period of cold weather due to sunlight blocking dust and smoke, followed by a period of extremely hot climatic conditions caused by high levels of CO2. The Cretaceous extinction event wiped out the large marine reptiles, pterosaurs, and ornithischians. With the exception of the avians, the saurischians go extinct as well. The surviving avians would continue to evolve into the birds we are familiar with today. Freshwater sharks also go extinct during this event. Amphibians, crocodiles, and turtles were barely affected. Only one of the 11 marsupial species survived, and all placental species survived. It is important to note all mammals up to this point were about the size of a rat. There were very few that reached the size of a fox. The first part of the Paleogene was quiet in Nevada, but about 45 million years ago, Nevada would see an enormous wave of volcanic activity. It began in northeastern Nevada and over time migrated to the southwest. Thousands of feet of ash buried the ancient landscape. Between 36 and 16 million years ago, an estimated 17,000 cubic miles of lava was ejected during no fewer than 250 violent eruptions. For comparison, Mount St. Helens only ejected 0.7 cubic miles of ash during its 1980 eruption. This volcanic activity, which happened as recent as 15,000 years ago, can be directly related to extinctional forces, which are still active today, that have torn Nevada apart and doubled its size over the last 40 million years. Imagine you grabbed a hold of Nevada at Reno and started pulling as hard as you could. You would stretch the rest of the state as you pulled Nevada towards you. This is pretty much what happened. Tectonic forces were and are essentially pulling Nevada apart from the west. As the state was pulled apart, blocks of it fell down. These are called basins, and the mountains that are left standing are the ranges. This caused exposure of the ancient rocks again in the ranges and young rocks in the basins, hence the designation of the Basin and Range Province of Nevada. If you look at a terrain map of Nevada, you will see the basins in the ranges in our state, which are all trending north to south. December 26th, 8:13 p.m., and we are here at the beginning of the Paleogene. Much of the Earth consisted of large tropical rainforests. The Paleogene period is the age of the mammals. This period is marked by the evolution of small, simple forms of mammals to large and diverse groups of mammals. During this time, mammal radiation was at its peak. Mammals, including primitive cats, dogs, primates, ungulates, or hoofed mammals, all began to radiate. Why do mammals really grab a hold during the Paleogene? Well, maybe because the dinosaurs are gone, which opened up several niches that needed to be filled. But also, this radiation could have possibly been due to the evolution of new dentition, which allowed these animals to more effectively chew and process their food. Early primates would develop opposable thumbs for climbing trees for food and advanced eyesight capable of seeing colors. Lemurs are primates. Lemur fossils have been recovered from this time period in Nevada. Towards the end of the Paleogene, the climate would start to cool. It is December 27th at 11:27 a.m. and we are here in the beginning of the Neogene. Due to global cooling, large tropical forests were replaced by grasslands. Widespread grasslands enhanced the radiation of grazing mammals, which evolved during the Paleogene. Grasslands do not provide for many places for mammals to hide from their predators. So if an organism has nowhere to hide from their predators, what would be some options? Well, they could run fast, fight or intimidate their predators, or be eaten. So we have this environment with lots of tall grass and the need for speed. So it only makes sense that fast-running grazers like the horse, antelope, and deer would evolve at this point. Antelope, which are the fastest land mammal in North America, are thought to have evolved speed as a mechanism to evade predators such as the North American cheetah. Several animals grew really large in order to intimidate their predators like the mammoths, elephants, rhinos, hippos, elephant-sized ground sloths or megatherium, and paraceratherium or hornless rhinos. A fun fact, therium means beasts, and it is a term used for monstrous animals. About 7 million years ago, some unknown event split off a small population of primates. Generation after generation, they accumulated mutations which would separate them from their lost primate ancestors and eventually give rise to humans. By the very end of the Neogene, early hominids show up in the fossil record. In rocks dated back to 2.8 million years, the earliest documented representative of the genus Homo was found in eastern Africa. By the end of the Neogene, mammals and birds evolve into roughly their modern-day form. The Quaternary can be broken down into two time periods, the oldest being the Pleistocene and the more recent and current time period, which is referred to as the Holocene. The Pleistocene marks the onset of the ice ages, with more than 20 glacial and interglacial cycles taking place. Ice sheets covered Canada and the northern United States, although at this time only a few of Nevada's mountains were heavily glaciated. Climatic cooling caused less evaporation and more precipitation, which accumulated in the many basins formed by extinction. These are referred to as pluvial lakes. Pluvial means rain. The largest of these lakes was Lake Lahontan, which was restricted to western Nevada and covered 8,610 acres. This is about the size of New Jersey, and it was over 500 feet deep. Mammoths or mastodons, giant ground sloths, camels, shrub oxen, horses, cheetahs, and other extinct mammals are known to have inhabited Nevada during this time. Moving into the Holocene, the climate was warming, causing evaporation of Lake Lahontan, which separated into smaller and smaller basins that were isolated by mountain ranges. Walker and Pyramid Lakes are the last remnants of Lake Lahontan. A living relic of Nevada's ice age is Pyramid Lake's Kui-Ui fish. Geological processes continue to form Nevada's landscape. Earthquakes remind us that tectonic forces are still at large, and evidence shows that molten rock is only a few kilometers underground in some areas. Volcanic activity may not be completely over. Tectonic and erosional forces will continue to change Nevada for millions of years to come. During the Pleistocene, hominids would continue to evolve. The first evidence of Neanderthals or cavemen has been found in Europe in rocks dating back 300,000 years ago. Our DNA, that is, mitochondrial DNA, traces all 7 billion people alive today back to one woman who lived in Africa 170,000 years ago. It wasn't until 45,000 years ago that Homo sapiens came into contact with Neanderthals, and 36,000 years ago, Neanderthals vanished. The reason for the disappearance of Neanderthals is highly controversial. In any case, Homo sapiens would survive, and through thousands of years of evolution, would give rise to modern-day people like yourself. People entered North America about 15,000 years ago from Asia via a land bridge that formed between Siberia and Alaska. Early people then radiated south throughout North America and into South America. There was an abrupt extinction of many mammals, especially mammals with larger body sizes, at the end of the Pleistocene. The exact cause of the extinction is still a topic of debate, but many hypotheses lie around overhunting by humans and climatic change. The Holocene is basically what you see now. It is the period of time where we see the development of major civilizations which transition to urban living in the present. We now get to enjoy 4.6 billion years of evolution that has taken place. Evolution continues even if it's not obvious. For example, men in general are getting taller. Less than 3,000 years ago, the tolerance for lactose was still developing, and now more than 95% of people can digest it. We constantly develop genes that resist disease. Blue eyes are becoming more common, and there are more high-altitude breathers. Here is a nice simplified diagram from National Geographic showing the vertebrate family tree and millions of years of evolution, all building up to the world we are familiar with and enjoy today. So take a deep breath of air that has changed numerous times to become the perfect composition for you to breathe. And use those eyes, which have been evolving for millions of years, to take a look at our beautiful blue skies, made possible by an atmosphere that has also been evolving for 4 billion years, and the dynamic landscape that surrounds you. Use that big brain that has evolved to think about the scenery you see and just what it took for it to become what it is, and perhaps what it will be in the future. We have come to the end of this presentation. We hope you have learned something new and have enjoyed this video. Have a great day.